Hi folks, okie dokie. What are we going to talk about today? Yes, we are going to talk about another product from Topaz. Topaz Sharpen AI. Now I've got to say from the outset that you all know by now, as YouTube subscribers and YouTube viewers and Patreon members, that I do recommend Topaz Denoise AI. But quite a lot of people have been in contact with me since I've been doing these Topaz Denoise AI videos about Topaz AI Sharpen or Sharpen AI. And say, Andy, should I get it? Should I get it? Should I get it? And I always said, to be quite honest with you, I've always said no. And I'm going to have to explain myself here. Noise is an inherent problem that we all suffer from, be it amateurs or professionals. Okay? And there's ways and means of doing noise reduction which give you excellent results but are very time consuming, and frankly the learning curve is quite steep. And so when something like Topaz Denoise comes along that seems to do as good a job with a lot less effort, sometimes, most of the time, it would be stupid of me to sort of deny its existence and how good it is. But Sharpen AI, let me explain why I've been a little bit down on it. It's not because of what it does, but it's sort of the way people might take it. Because you've only got to look at YouTube and do a YouTube search for it, and you get headlines, sensationalist headlines like "Never miss focus again." Well, you never miss focus if you set your autofocus system up properly. Create massive depth of field in your images. No, just try choosing the right aperture. So the thing is, if you don't know what you're doing and you're not experienced, as far as I've always been concerned, something like Topaz Sharpen AI could become a bit of a crutch for photographers, if you get me drift. You know where I'm coming from, or I hope you can see where I'm coming from. But there are times when something like Topaz Sharpen AI will come in handy, and I've tried it once or twice before over the years since it first came out, and it was okay, but then again it wasn't, and it led to all sorts of blooming further problems that you'd have to get round once you'd actually run the filter. And so, I wasn't all that keen. However, I have actually spent money, which is quite rare for me, as you know, and I've bought the latest version of Topaz Sharpen AI. And I'm going to show you why, okay? Why I've bought it. There will be, in all honesty and transparency, a link in the description below, where if you go and click it, you too can go and buy it. And Topaz, in their infinite wisdom, chuck me a bit of money, which helps me keep my head above water and helps me keep on making these videos, although I should actually make a few more for YouTube. I'm getting a bit lax. But anyway, that's beside the point. So we're going to start off, we're going to work in Lightroom and Photoshop, but it works equally well if you're working in raw therapy. In fact, sometimes it works better, but we'll cross that bridge or address that in another video. Okay, so the first image we're going to look at is this, which is a big lump of ice on Jökulsárlón beach in Iceland, or Jökulsárlón, depending on how you like to pronounce it. And yeah, it's a time exposure. You can see 6 seconds, f13, it's on a D800E, and yeah, it's okay. Or is it? No, it isn't. Now, you see, a lot of people would think, well, this is out of focus, Andy. Yes, it is, but it's not. It's not out of focus. You see, if I look at a picture that is focused in exactly the same place, but it's at 1/1250th of a second as opposed to 6 seconds, you can see the ice is a lot sharper. But you can still see there's a bit of motion blur on the water spray from the waves. So that is the C state, okay, and this thing is just teetering on the beach, okay, just about grounded out, so it's rocking and rolling all over the place. So fundamentally, what you've got going on in this shot is not out of focus blur, it's a little bit of motion blur, all right. So we could cure the problem, I suppose, inside of Photoshop, but it'd be a lot of messing around. So let's just leave it at default as it's processed now. I mean, I would show you what it's like before processing. If I just go to settings, reset, and there we go. Don't ask me why the horizon is on the tilt. The two people who were with me know why the horizon was on the tilt, but we are not going to go any further than that. So let's go back to where we were. And so I'm going to edit this inside of Photoshop, but I'm going to go edit a smart object in Photoshop. And let's come over to Photoshop, rather like that. So here we've got the smart object open inside of Photoshop. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to Layer, and I will just go to Smart Object, New Smart Object Layer, Copy. Now what this will enable me to do is create myself a retreat position, because this is the starting image, and also it allows me to create a workflow where I can mask one layer in over the other, should I find the need to do so. But the first thing I will say is this. You are better off sending an unsharpened image to Topaz Sharpen AI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click that smart object, and that will open it up inside of Camera Raw. And all I'm going to do is take the sharpening off, take it all the way down to 0. I'm going to go click OK. And so if I go in at 100%, you can see that I've got no sharpening on that layer and a little bit of sharpening on the layer below. Okay, so all we're going to do now is go to Filter, and we're going to go to Topaz Labs, Topaz Sharpen AI. And let's open it up and let's have a discussion of the actual workspace. Okay, now I've got everything turned to auto, alrighty, so we can have a 4-up view, even though there's either 10 or 11 different ways we can work inside of Sharpen AI. These will update themselves, and so we've got basically 4 methods chosen for us here at random: out of focus very blurry, motion blur normal, too soft normal, out of focus normal, and of course that's the active one. We could make motion blur normal the active one, and we could go too soft neutral, and we could try an other method, or too soft normal I should say, even though we have already got it down here on the bottom right. So you can mix and match these. Personally, I either go for a side-by-side view, or I'll go for a split view, which we can use to fundamentally drag from the original unsharpened version to the sharpened version. Not that that looks very brilliant at all. We could try too soft very blurry and see what that comes up with. Yeah, you see now that's gone very sharp. Alrighty, but you see what we can do is we can do a side by side, or sometimes I will just use a whole image view, because I don't need to see what the original looks like. All I'm concerned about is what does the new potential version look like. But I'll keep it in a split view, and if we allow the program or the plugin to choose the correct the correct sharpening model, it's gone here for out of focus normal. I don't like that at all, so I'm just going to take that off there, and then I've got access to all of these different models, as they say. There is a standard one at the top. If you click standard, I'm not joking, 99 times out of 100, it takes forever to actually get this little blue bar across all the way over to the right. And the results aren't always brilliant, I'll tell you that now. But what I will say is this. As I've already said earlier, with regard to this image, the actual blur I'm trying to get rid of is motion blur. So let's go for the maximum motion blur correction, and let's see what it comes up with. And you see how much faster that is than standard. Don't ask me why the standard seems to take so long, unless it's something to do with the fact that it's going through the image and analysing it in great detail. But you can see that is at auto, because we've got the auto switch turned on. Now the image is at a very low ISO, it's at base ISO, so there is no noise in the image, so I'm just going to cancel all the noise suppression and just let it update, and that still looks very sharp. Let's go and have a look at the edge over here, which tonally is somewhat more indistinct from its background, and I'm really liking what I'm seeing there. To me, it's just a little bit too much. And if we come down to this bottom right hand corner and let it work its way over, it's where you get the darker tones and the higher contrast edges. To me, again, it is a little bit too much. So what I'm going to do is bring the remove blur down from 49 to somewhere like 36. Let it run again, and there we go. And I think that is perfectly acceptable. Let's go and check that lower contrast edge over there. Let it work up again, and there we go. Yes, perfectly acceptable. So I'm going to click there. I like this result because that then gives feedback to Topaz about the settings that I've just used, and a certain amount of these submissions gets built into the algorithm, because you have to remember that all Topaz AI products carry a database of images, image fragments, samples of noise from various sensors, etc., etc. So what you're actually doing if you click that little smiley button is you're actually contributing to the database with inside future iterations of Topaz products, whichever one you happen to be using. So there you go. At least I think that's the way it works anyway. So I'm just going to go and click apply, and we'll just wait for this to render out, and I don't think it'll take too long. And there we go. Okay, so because we brought it in as a smart filter on a smart object, it is, as I've shown you before with Topaz denoise when we've been using smart objects, you can actually go in and vary the settings. So you see there's a little artifact up here, okay, which is why I like to use the smart objects thing, because what it does, it gives me a mask, which I can then just basically get a brush, painting with black inside the mask, and I can sort of brush those artifacts away should I not like what's going on. If we come out to a fit to screen view, I could actually try and go to select. Let's try this, select subject. Boom, 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 boom. There we go, select subject. So I could, in actual fact, go to select, and where are we? Inverse. Okay. And seeing as I'm working inside the mask, I could just go to edit, fill, and just elect to fill it with black, rather like that. So if I now go select, deselect, and then I come and look at my image, okay, so we've got a relatively sharp bulk to the iceberg, for want of a better description. But as you can see, it needs to be softened off with a white brush inside the mask, just around the edges. So what we can do is we can go and paint in just around the edges like that, because the selection for the mask was a little bit too aggressive. Okay, so as you can see, I can paint in the sharpness, okay, rather like that, and we could go all the way around the image, and hey presto, yes, jolly good. But that's a relatively simple use of Topaz Sharpen AI, and I'm sure you'll agree it's done an exceptional job of getting rid of the motion blur in that image. Don't forget, this smart object on the bottom layer does actually carry Lightroom's default sharpening. So that's our starting image, and this is where we've ended up, courtesy of Topaz Sharpen AI. Alrighty, so without any further ado, let's shut that image down. We don't need to save it, and we'll come back to Lightroom and we'll look at another image. Okay, and I've got an absolute wodge of these photographs, and they were shot with a D3 with a Sigma 300-800, and the Sigma 300-800 was a pain in their buttocks. It really was, because it didn't always function 100% perfectly. It used to keep wearing out, and God alone knows what else. And not the quickest focusing lens in the world, even on a Nikon D3, which is what I used to shoot this image with, of this whitetail sea eagle perched on an old dead tree trunk. And we've got Lightroom's default sharpening on, and this to me is looking pretty good, as is. Down here it's looking a little bit out of focus, because obviously this tail's quite considerably further. It's probably 8-9 inches behind the feet, so you know, it is what it is. But from a sharpness point of view, it's not too bad. And our big problem up here is the head, and that's just not within the depth of field boundary for f8 at, what is it, I think it's 800mm, 750mm on the old 300-800, and so yeah, okie dokie. So how do we get around this problem? Same as we got around it in the previous image. So with Lightroom's default sharpening on, I am just going to go to editing, and I'm going to go open a smart object inside of Photoshop, and there we go. And we're just going to go to layer, come down to smart objects, new smart object via copy, and then we're going to double click on that new smart object, and we are going to take the sharpening down to 0 and click OK. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go to Topaz Sharpen AI, open it up as a plugin, yes, and here we go. So we're still using the data or settings that we used in the previous image. Let's go and have a look at the problem area, which is the head, and just let it update itself, and you can see now that that is, wowzers, that is super sharp. It's not nice, not for my taste anyway, it's too much, but you can see it's dialing in where it thinks it's supposed to be, with regard to the depth of focus in the image, and it's just making the sharpness great, but it's too much. As you can see, I'm still using the motion blur very blurry settings. Now you could say, well, it's too soft, let's go for too soft very blurry, and again that looks alright, but is it actually really alright. Is it too much? Well, first of all, there's little to no noise in the image, so again, I'm going to minimize or remove suppress the noise, and it's still looking a little bit on the sharp side. So I'm going to drop that blur or remove blur amount down, and that's looking a little bit better, but it still looks a little bit harsh over here. So let's just go back to that motion blur, very blurry. And there's just something about that rings true with me. I'm just going to turn it down a little bit, remove blur. Notice we've already removed suppressed noise. And that to me just looks a little bit better. So it's a toss-up between motion blur, very blurry, which, I mean, it's a live animal and it is moving around, so there might be a little bit of motion blur in there. Or do we go for too soft, very blurry? Hard to say. I think this one's actually looking a little bit better. Let's go and have a look at out of focus, very blurry. And again, we'll suppress the noise. And let's see what this does. Far too harsh. Let's turn it down and see what happens now. No, it's still too harsh. So let's go back to too soft, very blurry. Wait for it to update. Let's just tweak that, remove blur down just a little bit more. And I'm quite happy with that. I don't think that looks too bad at all. I might put a little bit of suppressed noise in there, 5 or so, and just let it update, just in case that might help with some of these areas here, which are looking a little bit artifacty, but they're not. It's not helping at all. And, you know, we're concerned with the head, which makes us sort of overlook areas like this. Because if I bring the split back across, yeah, you can see there is a little bit of motion blur in there. And this is why I think the motion blur actually worked a little bit better, because it doesn't create quite so much artifacting in these areas here. So even though it's out of focus because we've run out of depth of field, there is a little tiny bit of motion blur in there, which this motion blur, very blurry model actually seems to be coping with better than anything else. Should we just bring that down to sort of 21, 22? So let's just wait for that to update. That looks an awful lot better. So you just have to pay very, very close attention to which model you're using and how you have the controls set. Alrighty, a lot more attention than I think, because I've watched quite a few videos on YouTube and I don't think they go into quite as much detail as I'm doing here. But you know, you're the guys who consume the videos, so you make up your own mind. Let's just click apply and let it process out, and we'll head off back into Photoshop. Alrighty, so here we are. Coming into it overall at 100%. The head looks okay, but down at the bottom it looks a little bit over sharp. If I turn the Topaz layer off, that's looking a little bit better for a archival type image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it back on, so we've got the full benefit of the Topaz AI Sharpen. But then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn it down a little bit like that. Okay, and yeah, I don't think that looks too bad at all. So we could actually turn it back up again and then use the mask to actually paint out where we don't want it. But really and truly, I just think just fading it out just a little bit is actually doing us a favour. All this lot looks quite good, as long as I've got crisp, sharp focus on the feet. I'm a happy bunny. Work our way up the body until we get to the head. That head's still looking a-okay. Much better than it was. We go back to have a look at how it was before. Yep. And I just get the feeling that there's just a few places over here where I prefer not to see it quite so much as I'm seeing it. So what I'll do is I'll click in the mask, and I'll go and get my paintbrush tool, and we'll switch out to painting with black, but we'll go into an opacity of around about 40%, something like that. And what I can do is I can just paint over these areas where I think I've got a little bit of an artifact, and I can just reduce the amount of visibility of that topaz sharpening layer, just where I think I need to reduce it, just over there and there. And we could also do this through a luminosity mask selection or an edge selection, because it's actually the darker areas and the very bright areas where it might be a little bit undesirable. So seeing as we might want to mask out the dark sample, we might want to work with the darks and the lights together. That will be an inverted mid-tone mask that would be required there. But we won't bother doing that. We'll just keep things nice and simple. And looking at the image overall, I don't think that looks too bad. So all we've done is just drop the layer opacity, so we've taken the overall sharpness down, and then we're just hiding it with this little mask here, which doesn't look all that blooming brilliant, does it? Wow. But it does the job. So there we go. So we'll out click on the mask again, and we'll consider that image done as well. So we'll shut that down, and we'll go don't save. We'll come back to Lightroom, and we'll go for the last image. Okay, now this image was, oh dear, it's a bit on the dark side, isn't it? Let's go and do a process version swap, and then come back to the basics panel, exposure, contrast back where it was. Let's bump up the whites a little bit. Okay, rather like that. Give it a little pep of exposure. Give it a little pep in the shadows, right? And that doesn't look too bad at all. However, yeah, welcome to the world of the Sigma 300-800 on a Nikon D300. Wow. And this is taken way back. God, when was this shot? When was it shot? Where's the blooming date? I'm going blind, I can't see. 2008. Wow. Yeah. So there we go. And I've got a load of these shots that are subpar. So I've never done anything with them. And, you know, let's just go and have a look what we can do here inside of Topaz denoise. So you can see we've got a little bit of background noise. Now there's a couple of things we might make use of inside of Lightroom. One being under effects, this add grain. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shove this image into Photoshop as a smart object, and then I'm going to bring it back into Lightroom, and we'll just see what else needs doing to it. So we'll just go edit, edit in, open a smart object in Photoshop, and there we go. So first thing we're going to do is go to layer, smart objects, new smart object via copy, and we'll double click, and we will remove all the sharpening from that smart object. Alrighty. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to filter, and we're going to go to Topaz Labs, Topaz Sharpen AI. And again, it's picked up the settings we used last time, and so that is a zero noise suppression and a little bit of remove blur at 22 using the motion blur very blurry model of sharpening. And wow, I mean, that's a bit special, isn't it? I'm quite surprised at that. I might put a little bit of noise suppression in there. Let's just turn it up, and wow, look at the background now. Gee whiz, that's gone as smooth can be. And you talk about Topaz Denoise AI. Wow. So let's just leave that at 3, and because if I turn it off, you'll notice something up here. The noise is quite blotchy. Now, you have to take these previews with a bit of a pinch of salt. It doesn't look quite so blotchy now. It looks a little bit more consistent, but no, there's blotches here. I don't know whether you can see them on YouTube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn up suppressed noise to about 5 or 6. And that might well even things out. And yeah, that doesn't look too bad at all, but it's a little bit aggressive on the beak. So you see, they thought about this over at Topaz, and what we could do is we could go and add some grain to the actual image. And of course we could turn that all the way up to 100. And now you can see the image is sharpened, it's denoised, but then we've added a load of grain back into it. And because we've now got grain here and grain in the beak, does this image not look more believable? Yes, it damn well does. But I'm not going to add the grain in there. So what I'm going to do, but that's just something you need to bear in mind. You've always got to make your images look believable, because if you get a bugger like me sees your images at full resolution and I see a mismatch between the noise in low frequency detail areas and high frequency detail areas where they're just rounding out of focus, if I see a big disparity there, I know you've done some over processing with regard to noise reduction. And if you're sitting in front of me at the time, I will probably give you a slap. Yes. No, I wouldn't, not really. But, there's our starting image. There's our finished image. Yeah, I'm quite surprised. Let's just check all the way down the woodpecker to make sure we've not got any major artifacts being thrown, because believe you me, sometimes you will get major artifacts being thrown if you're not careful, if you're in the wrong sharpening model usually. So you just got to check things, and I think that looks alright. So what I'm going to do is click apply, and that will then scoot this processing back over to that copy, smart object copy layer, and there we go. And so let's go and blow the image up to 100%. Let's leave it in the middle. Let's turn off Topaz Sharpen AI and then sort of turn it back on again. And I just think that looks epic. I really do think that looks epic. Did I actually turn off that add grain? I don't think I did. So what we'll do is we'll just reactivate Topaz Denoise out of the Smart Object filters. And yes, I thought I hadn't. So what we'll do is we'll turn off add grain. So now you can see that there is definitely a mismatch here. This background is too clean, all right? But we're now going to go and click apply. And God, I came a little bit off piece there, didn't I? Woohoo, dear. So let's wait for it to finish off processing and scooting over into Photoshop. That's better. That's more like what I was expecting. And let's just scan down the image. Nope, we've got no major problems with artifacting in there. And so all I'm going to do is go File, and I'm just going to go Save. Alrighty. And so once it's saved out, we're going to come back to Lightroom, and here is the TIFF. Right. Now then, I've got a little bit of headroom in the histogram. So what I can do is I can just bump the whites just a little bit, just to brighten that image up just a little bit more. Notice no clipping being generated. And then I'll come into the image at 100%. And yeah, I just think that looks spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. But I'm just going to come to the effects. And I'm just going to add a little bit of grain back in there. And let's just take it up to sort of the upper teens. And I just think that matches up absolutely perfectly. You would think that was a raw file straight out of the camera, and with very little processing on it. This is one of the problems we used to get with the 300-800, this haloing. But what we could do is take this image back into Photoshop, and just with a very gentle clone stamp tool, you could just take that thin veiled sort of out of focus halo off, which you've seen me do many times before in other videos. So there you go. I mean, that's just my thoughts on Topaz Sharpen AI. It is worth having. Any tool that creates or enables you to create that from that, yeah, any tool that turns that into that with very little effort is well worth having in your toolbox. Very well worth having in your toolbox. And so there you go, guys and girls. I hope you found that useful, and I shall speak to you again very soon. But until then, stay safe, stay well, keep taking the pictures, and don't forget, if you remember, over on my Patreon channel, you can gain access to the raw files that I've used in this video. And speaking of patrons, over on Patreon, if I go to library, now I'm not really going to go into this image in all that greater detail. Now, I'm not sharing this shot at all, but I will just show you. This is a shot from one of my patrons, Peter, who actually, this was a grab shot. It was the only time he saw this crown crane, and it was flying away from him, and he was fitted out with a 400mm prime and a teleconverter, and he just about had time to grab a couple of quick frames and it was gone. So ideally, it's not shot in ideal conditions from a technical standpoint of view. Birds going away, but at least you can see what's going on. But of course, depth of field wise, I mean, just absolutely knackered. But I did a detailed video for Peter on how I would correct this image, and we used Topaz AI Sharpen to correct it, and that was the correction. Yeah, so that does just go to show the sort of thing that you can do with Topaz Sharpen AI. But, you know, I mean, what more do you want than that from that as a good example of what you're capable of doing with basically a couple of little clicks. Yeah, I think that's well worth the money. And like I say, there is a little link below, and if you go and click it and you go and buy Topaz Sharpen AI, they will actually give me a little bit of commission on it. All right. So yeah, as I said before, guys and gals, stay safe, stay well, keep taking the pictures, and I'll speak to you very soon. Tooroo.